Hello again, this is Greg with MVC Tutorials. This is Entity Framework Tutorial Part 2. If you remember correctly, in Part 1 we went over the tables that we're using for in our SQL server, which is a local SQL Express instance with Windows authentication. And there's a persons, a teams table, and a few store procedures for adding and getting these two objects. So I'm not going to go into too much detail of how that was done or going to Management Studio. We did all that in the first tutorial, and if you need to catch up, please read that one. So we're at this edmx file. If you go to Solution Explorer, you'll notice up first of all, Entity Framework DLL was added to your references. You'll notice that there is this person model with a whole bunch of designer and context files that you never touch. They're all dynamically created, so if you change it and then you do a F6 or rebuild or even a build, I believe, it's going to regenerate those files. Or if you do an update to your Entity Framework model from changes you may have made from SQL, which is another cool thing I'll be showing later, you will find that you can't, or that the designer automatic files or auto-generated files will be recreated on the fly. So anything you make a change to won't be there any longer. Another thing you'll notice from what I mentioned in the last tutorial, there's this app config that gets created. Now, if you have any familiarity with the web.config file, which is in any web forms, WCF, web services, and MVC projects, you'll notice that this is set up very similar. You've got a configuration, config section, the section name of entity, and you'll notice that there's a connection string here, and there's a name of sandbox entities, which was that name that I said you were going to need to remember, but not for now. This is something else. You'll notice the connection string, which, just as a heads up, your connection string will definitely look a lot different from mine if you are consuming this in a SQL server. This has a lot of extra stuff because it's it's doing it local. And then you'll notice the data source right here. Whoops, man, this is not holding its own here. Let's get over here. Data source points to the server. Initial catalog is sandbox, which is the database, and we're using integrate. Whoops, man, I'm sorry about that. And we're using integrated security equals true because we're using Windows authentication. And that's really the only things you need to know. Provider name gets automatically created as well. But the only things you may have to change, depending on how you set things up, is the data source piece. Because if you have a development in a production server or a local, you're doing it locally, and then you change this to the production database, you might have to change that name. So what we're going to do, what I like to do right off the bat, before I even think about anything else, is add the connection string somewhere. Now, what I'm doing here is this web config. I'll explain to you in a minute why I do it this way. So let me see here. Entity Framework, which is already there. So we're going to add right here. And we'll build that, make sure it builds okay. Alright, perfect. So why did I add it here if it's already up here? Well, here's the thing. Whether it's an app.config or a web.config, the configuration that takes precedence is the one that is being run. Now, obviously, you can't run a library, so the library is not what's going to be run. The web config is what's going to be run. And if it can't find anything by the name of sandbox entities, it's going to freak out. And even if this compiles, when you try to run it even locally, it's going to freak out because it doesn't know what that is. So technically, if you wanted to, you could comment this out after you're done setting everything up, and it wouldn't be the wiser. So just to give you a heads up, that's what I do immediately, because otherwise I get through half my coding, think it's working great, and then I hit F5 and everything goes to hell. So that's a little bit about that. So that's as far as Solution Explorer. Those are the new things. Um, what now in the model browser, which is your layout of the edmx file, you'll see that you have the diagram, which is this right here. Entity types, which is person and team, and you'll notice that it's got all your columns, and you'll notice that it did singularize. That's a interesting word, right? It did singularize your objects. Complex types, which I'll go over in a little bit. Basically, it is entity's attempt at giving you some kind of random result of all your possible things you could be getting back from the store procedure. You can change this, and I'll show you how very shortly, but just kind of go with me here. The associations just shows you your foreign key, which is what we were talking about in the last tutorial. Your function imports. These are the import versions of your store procedures. Now you can see down here, this is the actual version of your or instance of your SQL server. This actually has the person's table, the ID, and everything written down. It shows you that it's a primary key and all that good stuff. And if you actually click on each one of these, it'll show you what type it is, whether it's generated by the store, generated by you. In fact, I must not have. I thought I made that a sequential ID. Maybe I didn't. But in any case, we'll fix that later if that is the case. Same thing with teams. You'll see that it's a varchar. That's a unique identifier. Okay, we're great. We're good to go, right? Now here's our store procedures. I don't know why it says store procedures and functions. I guess. Yeah, I'm not sure why it does that, because your functions are up here, really, your function imports. So I'm not sure why that is. So now these store procedures, if you right click and do add function import, that's what you would have had to do if you didn't check the checkbox that says, hey, by the way, just automatically make my functions. Now, even though I end up changing the results, to me it's just one less click I gotta do if all my functions are already created. Now, what you'll notice here is on my actually, here's two things here. Let me just check on my time here. Okay, we're doing all right still. You'll notice two things. One is that I have 4 store function imports and 4 store procedures, but I only have 2 result types. Why is that? Well, that's because in my ads, I didn't end up doing any select statement to get the inserted ID value and pass back the contents of the person that was added or the team that was added. So these two actually don't return anything, but these two do. So it attempted to name something that it knows exactly what you're going to get back. Okay. Now, with that said, you'll notice that when it tried to do that, you'll notice a get person by first name underscore result. If we were to click get person by first name and do edit, you'll notice it chose the right store procedure, and it tried to make its own complex type. Now, here's something interesting I ran into today. If you, let's say you realize you misspelled team, right? What you can do is you can change it in SQL, and then you can re-get the column information, and then click update, and it will update all these fields in the auto-generated stuff in the complex result, which is very cool, because then you're not, I don't know how, probably anybody watching this or listening to this or what have you has not followed the other iterations of Entity, but the other older iterations, if you made any change in your SQL model, you basically had to tear this whole thing down and reconsume the Entity object, which would, instead of edmux, it was called something else like modl or some stupid thing like that. So just to give you a heads up, this is like leaps and bounds better just by having this update button that, let's say I spelt first wrong. I could change in my store procedure, re-update it, or re-get the column information. It'll say first name now, and click update. Now, just in case you don't believe me, we have this first name here, right, that we're getting back. Let's say that, let's see. let's say that we go to get person by first name and we do modify. Okay, so let's see, select star from persons. Let's do select first name, and we're going to do as first. And I spelt it wrong, okay? And then we'll execute that. Let's go back to our little handy dandy thing here and do edit, columns. We're going to see we got whatever name, which is different than what I originally had. Update, and you'll see the action, it deleted all these things and it added that for you. So it redid this whole complex object for you, and you can use that throughout your tool. This will become an actual object that you can use to manipulate. You can consume it inside of a generic list. There's just so many possibilities. I can't even talk about them all because I'm already at 11 minutes and I'm running out of time for tutorial 2, which is kind of not good. So we're going to do a star here, do execute. Oh, what's your problem? Oh, the as. Let's get rid of that as. Boom. Oh. I gotta get rid of this too. That's what happens when you rush, Greg. Okay. Now, what we're going to do here is I'm going to do an edit, do entities. Okay, because really I don't want this result, in the complex result in this case, because I know that I'm getting back a person on this. So I'm getting column, there you go, you've got all that back, and there's your person. Now you can also create a new complex result and give it a new name if you want to. That's also up for grabs. So we're going to click OK, and now you'll notice now the return type is person. We're going to do the same thing for these. Let's see if I can just do that. No, I guess it takes you there anyway. So there's that. Okay, so everything's done. Now you'll notice the little star here. Always save and rebuild before you start coding. And then in the next tutorial, we'll just make sure this builds okay. 2 succeeded. In the next tutorial, we're actually going to start coding. I know this has been a lot of showing, but this is all very important stuff to understand if you really want to understand what's going on instead of just, hacking away at it. It really pays off in the end. So, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed what you listened to, feel free to visit my blog at http://objectreferencehell.com. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.